In this session, we'll try to understand a very interesting and an extremely intricate process that takes place in the bodies of females that have attained puberty. And this particular process, this particular phenomena, is known as the menstrual cycle uh, or menstruation. Now, what is the meaning of menstrual cycle first of all? So let us go through the definition. Let us read through it. So the menstrual cycle is periodic and cyclic sequence of events. What do I mean by these two words? This means that this particular biological phenomenon takes place periodically after a period of 28 days, and it repeats itself. It's a cyclic event. And where does this event take place? It takes place in the ovaries and the uterus under the influence of hormones once puberty is reached. So menstrual cycle is involves two organs, and these two organs and this particular process cannot take place in the absence of hormones, and these hormones are only functional after puberty. This process takes place only after puberty is reached. What is puberty? When a female is mature sexually, she can successfully reproduce and produce young ones. Now, menstrual cycle is not a lifelong process. In the females, the process of menstruation or menstrual cycle ceases somewhere around 50 to 51 years, and at that point we say that menopause has been achieved, or the female is under menopause now. Now, now there are two events. The menstrual cycle can occurs in two stages or two phases, and in the ovaries, and it occurs in three steps or three phases in the uterus. So we've got a pair of ovaries. Inside of the ovaries, this menstrual cycle takes place in two steps: the stage 1 or first phase, and then we got the second stage. We'll look into what the stage 1 and stage 2 is. And in the uterus, and the uterus is a pear-shaped organ, if you remember, which opens up through the cervix into an external structure called the vagina, right? So in the uterus we got the lining, the endometrium, which basically undergoes changes, and there are three stages, and the uterus basically undergoes changes in three stages. So then there is something called as a stage 1, the stage 2, and then the stage 3. We'll look into this in just a little while. Now, what are these basic stages? Now, the ovary undergoes the two stages, and the first stage is called the follicular phase, or the formation or the phase during which follicles are formed. Now, follicles are nothing but a layer of cells called follicular cells. And we'll just look into it, what happens during the follicular phase. So the first stage in the ovarian events or the ovarian cycle is called the follicular phase. And once follicular phase is over, there is a second stage which is called the luteal phase, or the formation of corpus luteum, which we'll get to in just a little while. So you don't be intimidated by the terms. Just remember that ovary undergoes these periodic changes, which we call menstrual cycle, in two stages. First stage is follicular phase, and the second stage is luteal phase. And similarly, side by side, see, both the processes are happening side by side. When there are certain changes taking place in the ovary, for example follicular phase, there is a certain phase taking place in the uterus. We'll look into what those events are. Now, the uterus undergoes changes during those 21 days in these three stages. The first stage is known as the menstrual phase, or the phase during which the ruptured endometrial lining is removed from the body. And the second stage is proliferative phase, where endometrium is made again afresh. And the third is the secretory phase, in which the endometrium starts to secrete special chemical compounds, special biomolecules. Also, the ovary secretes some special components, and for that reason the third phase is called the secretory phase. Now, let us go to the next aspect, which are the hormones. Now, you remember, always bear in mind that hormones play a central role in the process of menstrual cycle. Now, first of all, let us define what hormones are. Now, hormones are biomolecules, primary steroid, and they have a lot of fatty acid component in them. But hormones are biomolecules which in extremely low concentrations, in nanoliters, extremely low concentrations, they are biologically active, which means Even in extremely small concentrations, they can bring about major metabolic and physiological changes in the body. So such chemicals are called hormones. Now, hormones are produced by a variety of structures, variety of organs and glands and tissues in our body. Now we'll just look at the hormones which are of importance to us, which play a major role in the menstrual cycle. Now, the hormones are released by the hormones, all the hormones involved in menstrual cycle emanate from two organs. The first organ involved is the brain, and the second organ that is involved is the ovary itself, or the pair of ovaries. So these two organs will release all the hormones. Now, what are the different hormones? Now, the brain releases something called as GnRH, LH or luteinizing hormone, and then FSH or follicle stimulating hormone. Let me just get into the details of these just a bit. Wipe the board and then I'll proceed. So in the brain, I've in the last session also we did the same. So let us say this is the human brain. So we got the human brain. In the human brain we got a structure called the hypothalamus. So this is the hypothalamus here, this structure here. When puberty is achieved, hypothalamus releases a hormone called GnRH in substantial amounts. It is not that GnRH is not produced before puberty, but it is produced in extremely low concentrations, lower concentrations, comparably low concentrations. But once puberty is hit, once the female is sexually mature, a considerable amount of GnRH is released. Now, what does this GnRH does? There is another neuroendocrine structure in the brain which is called the pituitary, right? And pituitary has two parts. We've done this in the previous lecture, but let us just draw. So this is the pituitary, and pituitary has two parts. We got the anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary is endocrine in nature, which means it produces hormones and releases them into the blood, whereas the posterior pituitary is nervous in nature, is neuronal in nature. It has nerves inside it. It is connected to the brain, right? So we are more interested in the anterior pituitary. Now, gonadotrophin releasing hormone secretes the GnRH, which is secreted by the hypothalamus, eventually reaches the anterior pituitary, and the anterior pituitary is stimulated, right? It is stimulated to produce two hormones, the luteinizing hormone, so it releases LH, and it also releases FSH. Now, what is the function of these two hormones? Let us look at that. The luteinizing hormone, where is it produced by? By the anterior pituitary. Follicular stimulating hormone, anterior pituitary. Now, the luteinizing hormone has a very important role. It is responsible for ovulation. Now, if you do not remember ovulation, let me tell you. From the ovary, from the surface of the ovary, once the secondary oocyte is ready, there is a structure called the Graafian follicle. The Graafian follicle has this structure on the inside, which is then released. So this structure has got those granular grainy cells around it, and then it has a secondary oocyte and a polar body, right? So this whole structure, the release of this secondary oocyte with all of those structures, the corona radiata, etc., this process of release of secondary oocyte plus the polar body from the ovary is called ovulation, and it is the luteinizing hormone which brings about this process of ovulation. Also, another role of luteinizing hormone is that it maintains a structure called the corpus luteum. Now, please don't bother yourself with what corpus luteum is. We'll just get to it in a little while, but for the moment I'm just introducing you to what luteinizing hormone does. We'll come back to all of these functions in just a little while. So they also the luteinizing hormone is also involved in maintenance of corpus luteum. I hope I can show you. So this structure here is called the corpus luteum. It is maintained. We'll come to that slowly and steadily. Now, the other hormone called the follicle stimulating hormone is again released by anterior pituitary. And what does it do? See, its name has all the answers for what it does. So it gives directions for the formation of follicle inside the ovary. So let me just scroll down and go to if I have the structure of this. So I don't have ovaries here. So let me just move to one of the slides. If I have opened up some slide, and if I have some images around, unfortunately I don't have any image at the moment, but let's see if I have any of the ovary somewhere here. You'll have to just bear with me while I search for the structure, and unfortunately I don't think we have any. So here we have a section of the ovary. Even better is this. So where were we? We were Right, so follicle stimulating hormone. Now, this follicle stimulating hormone, and let's get back to that wonderful slide that we had here. This is actually a section of the ovary, and inside of this ovary, now I won't be able to draw because my marker doesn't work here. You see these structures here, these large structures. These large structures are all follicular structures. Now, let me show you a primary follicle. So here is a primary follicle. You see this hollow white center, light colored center. This is actually where the primary oocyte is, and these cells around it, you see these grainy dotted cells, all of these granular cells here, these granular cells inside these spheres, these granular cells, all of these granular cells are called granulocytes or follicular cells. And the follicular stimulating hormone, when it reaches the ovary, it directs the ovary to make these granular cells around the oocytes. Why it does so is something that we'll get back in some time. We will go to that particular point in some time. So at the moment, what you need to remember is follicular stimulating hormone is released from anterior pituitary, and it directs the formation of follicles. What are follicles? A bunch of cells, granulosa cells, or we also call them the granulosa cells or the follicular cells. Now, another function of follicular stimulating hormone or FSH is secretion of estrogen by granulosa cells and theca cells. What are these? We'll come to that later, and we'll again revise what these hormones are. Now, these three hormones, at the moment you should at least know their names, you should know where they are secreted from, and you should know at least one function of each. GnRH tells the anterior pituitary to release the luteinizing hormone, ovulation. Follicular stimulating hormone, formation of follicles. That is all, at least one function each, right? Next we go to estrogen. Now, these are the hormones. So we've done the hormones produced by the brain, the GnRH, the FSH, and the LH. Now we go to the ovary. Now ovary secretes three hormones, and it does not secrete it by themselves. The ovary can only secrete these three hormones once it receives LH and FSH from the brain. Right? Otherwise, the ovary is just a room, a non-functional place. So when LH, FSH reach the ovary, three hormones are produced, and how they are produced, when are they produced, the details of that we'll look into it some time. So estrogen is the first hormone released by the ovary, and what estrogen does is, let me just rub this side, and so let me first of all draw the uterus. And so here is the uterus, right? This is the uterus, and that is absolutely not the way I should draw a wall. So let's say so this is the uterus, a pear-shaped organ, and then they are connected to the two fallopian tubes. The two fallopian tubes, one to the left, one to the right, and then we got the fimbriae, the finger-like projections, and then here we got the ovaries. We got the first, and we got the second ovary, and then the cervix, which is a tiny pore here, and then the vagina. So this uterus is made up of certain layers, and let me use this marker and let's draw some layers. So we got something called as the perimetrium, which is the outermost wall, right? Perimetrium, it is made up of some kind of tissue, and then we got something called as a myometrium, which is muscular in nature. So we got myometrium. These are permanent structures inside the uterus. Now, whenever estrogen is released, a temporary layer called endometrium is found. Endometrium, see, on both the sides, endometrium. Endometrium is a temporary tissue. So endometrium is the tissue which will allow for the implantation of the embryo inside it, the dividing embryo, right? So what is the function of estrogen? It helps in the formation and maintenance of the endometrium. So endometrium will not be formed and will not be retained if estrogen is not supplied. The moment the estrogen supply is stopped, the endometrium ruptures. What is the other function of estrogen? See, whenever there is excess of estrogen, it inhibits LH and FSH in the earlier follicular phase, but don't be bothered about it. So it does something to the LH and FSH. It tells the brain not to make them. That is also the function of estrogen. Right. Apart from that, there are other functions which we'll look at in some time. Now, progesterone, the second hormone released by the ovary, its function is again the same. It also helps in the formation and maintenance of the endometrial lining. This much you should know about both estrogen and progesterone. What are the other functions is we'll look at them later. And then there is a third hormone called inhibin. Its name suggests that it inhibits, it stops something. Now inhibin stops the secretion of FSH and LH by the brain. It tells the brain, okay, secrete less and secrete less and secrete less. And if there is a lot of inhibin, it will tell the brain to just stop secreting. Anyways, that stage usually does not happen. So I hope you've understood so far what is menstrual cycle, what are the two different events or the two basic events that take place during the menstrual cycle. We have the ovarian cycle and the uterine cycle, or ovarian phase and the uterine phase. And then the ovarian cycle is further takes place in two stages: the follicular phase and the luteal phase. And the uterine event takes place in three stages: the menstrual phase, proliferative phase, and secretory phase. We'll get into the details, don't bother yourself. And what are the different hormones of the involved in the menstrual cycle? The hormones are released by the brain and the ovary. The three hormones of the brain are GnRH, gonadotrophin releasing hormone, luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, and ovary. There are three hormones: estrogen, progesterone, and inhibin. And you should at least know one functions of each. And we will just conclude this introduction to menstrual cycle right here. In the next session, we'll proceed further. Thank you.